you might be wondering how I got from this to this. So let me show you. When you look up the creative process, you either get images that look like this or images that look like this, neither of which are particularly accurate or even make much sense, although this one is getting at something. If I tried to draw out a timeline of this piece, which I did, at first it would seem quite simple. There's a start and end date to the project. But then I remembered that exhibition I saw over a year ago, which ended up being a key piece of research in the project. Or you consider that I'm making this video about the piece months later, maybe that's part of the process as well. And it all gets a bit more confusing. But still, I'm going to try to take you through it. Monday the 8th of January, the first day back on Art Foundation after the Christmas, and the 3D group was briefed a project called Planar Constructions, and straight away we got making. We spent the week generating as much work as possible from the initial research and brief, and that meant working at materials like paper, cardboard, laser cutting, acrylic, all things that we could make very quickly and iterate very quickly, by which I mean you're repeating the same things but slightly different, and that making is the creative process rather than planning something out. At this point there are so many different possible directions that you have to take a step back and do a combination of two things, which is evaluating what shapes and forms you're interested in, what pieces that make you excited and which ones you're like, I'm not sure I want to do that. One thing about the creative process is that if you don't like it, it won't like you. So it's really important that you figure out what work you genuinely enjoy making. And you also want to continue your research and find more specific artists which are relevant to this new direction you're going in. At this point I looked back on one of my favourite artists, Maria Bartasova, whose exhibit at the Tate I think I saw at least 3 times while it was up, and I began to think about how her pieces could play into my work. On the 15th we got set a mini project to keep our momentum going. The idea being to make something like this, but me being me, I already had a bit of a specific idea of what I wanted to try and make. So I decided to take it in my own direction. I was looking at Barbara Hepworth, Henry Moore, and I wanted to make sort of a more organic plaster sculpture while we had the opportunity to be in the workshop planning how to work with plaster. This piece took a lot longer than expected. Everyone was done with their work within the day, and I spent the whole week carving, chiselling, and mainly sanding this piece down. But all the while, Maria Bartasova's work was in the back of my mind, and I began researching how I'd actually go about making these pieces, which involved casting plaster inside balloons. The whole process of getting plaster inside a balloon is about as fiddly as you'd imagine it to be. So I spent the weekend gathering the materials I'd need for that, which is basically a big plastic water bottle, some funnels, and of course balloons. Another thing about the creative process is that you can't stick to the plan too rigidly, because once you start making things, they take a life of their own. And this can mean embracing failures. This piece set too early and then cracked as I was carving it, trying to salvage the already failed piece. But because of that crack, I experimented with poking these wires through it, something that I really enjoyed the look of because it looked like kind of a crumbling construction site, and ironically enough was quite similar in aesthetic to the brief we'd been set at the start of the week that I kind of ignored. Quick warning, your teachers will usually get much more excited about your failures than the work you actually slaved hours over. Finally, we're getting to the most exciting part, but still, you might have a few skills to learn. And in my case, I still needed to learn how to cast plaster in balloons without spilling it everywhere, or the plaster setting too early, too late, so on. Now you know what you're making and how you're making it. It's time to actually get making. At this point, you'll suddenly be making a very high volume of work, and it's important to keep this momentum going. For example, by the end of this day, I'd already had what you could consider a final outcome or a final piece for the project. But I came back 2 days later, had a little reflection on what shapes, what forms I liked best. And so I spent that day trying to create more pieces like that. And so I also ended up with this final outcome, which was a piece I'd like just as much, if not more, as the original final outcome. Now that the hard work is done, you'd think that the rest of the journey would be easy, or even over. But suddenly you've got new briefs, new projects, you're getting absorbed in making new things, and you realise you forgot to even properly document the work that you've just spent so long making. So finally, a month later, you sit down and do a proper photo shoot with all your work. And maybe you decided to spray paint your work silver and kind of regret it. So make sure you take photos before you do that. But at this point, you're less attached to your initial ideas, which is a very important thing. Maybe if you're doing a more modular sculpture like me, you'll realise that pieces fitted together in ways you hadn't even considered or experimented with before. That also happened with this acrylic piece here. When I went back to do a photo shoot of it nearly a month later, I tried just making this crazy piece, which I hadn't even thought to do before, because I'd drawn out a plan and I only wanted to arrange it like that plan. But it's important to be able to try and expand from that, because that's when really creative decisions can get made. Maybe this will inspire you to pick up the project, maybe you'll leave it for now and it will stay out of mind. But maybe, just maybe, it will be that project that you come back to however many times, however far along the line.